Okay, so I want to continue our discussion that we were having about dreams, in particular in the context that they have to do with halacha. Now, we mentioned that there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin in the Flamid that talks about ostensibly a halacha shayla. It talks about someone whose father dies and leaves behind nechasim, and he's not sure if these belong to different people, and Ba Balach Chalayim and told him who the karka belongs to. So the Gemara tells us that we disregard whatever the Chalayim said, because different Chalayim is Lamaylam, but let me read it. Now, so we spoke last time in the context of how serious should dreams be taken, when do they have a meaning, when do they not have a meaning, and etc. Now, I want to focus more on the halacha element, but I want to start a little bit with this way. Anyone who's familiar with Rav Adi Yosef's history as a Baal Halacha, as a Paisik, as a leader, knows that one of the main, motivating factors or ideologies that Rav Adi lived by was the concept of l'hachzer atar liyeshna. Now, loosely translated, to return, the crown back to its original place. What Rav Adi was talking about was that there was a certain, befrat when there was like a kibbutz galius and people were gathering to Eretz Yisrael, there was to a certain degree, the Sephardic Kehila and their minhagim was becoming subsumed in the Ashkenazi Kehila and the Ashkenazi minhagim. In particular, in the Rabbanut of Eretz Yisrael at the time, under the leadership of Rav Uziel and Rav Herzog, there was a push of sorts to try to create some sort of unified psak, some sort of normative or one-size-fits-all psak that was definitely slanted or tilted towards Ashkenazi custom. For example, like just as one example, to something that Rav Adia fought against mamish early in his career, was most of the Ashkenazi poskim, it's machlekes rishonim, but most of the Ashkenazi poskim seem to have been machriya that bizman hazeh we don't do yibum anymore. Now, whatever the reason for that is, maybe it's dafka poskim who mostly lived in Christian lands where it was frowned upon, but for whatever reason it is, the halacha became that Ashkenazim don't do yibum anymore, whereas in the Sephardic world, where the halacha was that one could do yibum. Now, it's a great machlekes rishonim, and this is not so straight down the line. There are some, gedolei achronim on either side of the fence, Sai Ashkenazim, Sai Sephardim, who buck the trend and say to do something different. L'mashal the Chacham Tzvi, who is definitely Ashkenazi by all regards, bucks the trend and says, we could even do Yibum Bizman Hazeh. And there are Sephardi places who do the opposite and say not to do Yibum Bizman Hazeh. But in any case, when the Rabbanut was trying to figure out what the halacha should be, so the Rabbanut made some sort of edict that Yibum was not going to be done in Eretz Yisrael. Now, Rav Adia, as a young man, this is in maybe the early 50s, he was strongly against this, and in the Bezdin that he was running, he officiated a Yibum ceremony for a Yemeni family, maybe a Moroccan family or a Yemenite family who was there. He officiated a Yibum ceremony for them, according to his daya, that the psak for Sephardim is that they're allowed to do Yibum and there's no reason not to do Yibum. Now, additionally, there are many other cases where you could see this, but I think one of the cases that highlight this best is in particular this halacha shayla that arises relatively often in the life of a Sephardi family, and that is as follows. The halacha is that we know this is a pashtus, that any mitzvah shehazman grama, any mitzvah that is time related, men are mechuyev in it and women are not mechuyev in it. Now, of course, in any mitzvah v'isa, like a woman, is allowed to do the mitzvah if she wants to. Now, herein is a great machlekes. This is really a machlekes rishonim, Rabbeinu Tam, and the Rambam, Rashi, others. Rav Adia collect an inordinate amount of rishonim who weighed in on the matter. But this is a great machlekes rishonim. If when a woman is being mekayim, mitzvah asay shazman grama, does she make a bracha? Does she not make a bracha? Now, Rabbeinu Tam's day seemed to have been that even someone who's in a mitzvah v'isa, like a woman, when she's doing this mitzvah, she could make a bracha in any case, and that is how the Ramah paskins in Hilchos Lulav and Hilchos Shofar, and this is relevant many different times. When a woman is doing a mitzvah that she's not mechuyeves in, she still can make a bracha, and that is the normative Ashkenazic psak, that a woman can make such a bracha. Now, on the other side, the Rambam and probably Rashi and other different Rishonim seem to hold that someone who's in Ein Mitzvah V'Oisa cannot make a bracha, and there's different scales, how weit to take it, but some Rishonim seem to say it's even a bracha she'en tzricha, and it's aser to make a bracha. Other Rishonim just say you're not mechuyev to make a bracha. But in any case, that is the psak. And as I pass in the Mechaber, in two different places in Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber Paskins, that a woman who's doing a mitzvah saseh shazman gramash, which she's not mechuyev in doing, she does not make a bracha. Now, this l'chayru would have been the psak for a Sephardi kehila b'chol artzis pizureim, wherever they were living, as opposed to Ashkenazim, wherever they were living, they would have made these brachas. Now, when they came to Eretz Yisrael, and there's this melting pot effect that's happening, and all the different communities are melding and meshing together, is where the shaila arises once again. Now, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, who I think succeeded Rav Avadia as chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael later on, years later, as a young man, paskin that Sephardic women are allowed to make brachas on mitzvah shazman grama in accordance with Ramah's psak, and he held the Mechaber in this matter did not mean it to be binding that you're not allowed to. The Mechaber just meant you don't have to. Now Rav Avadia, Lu'umasai, in Shut Yabiyah Omer, in Arachaim Chelik Aleph, in a whole string of chuvas from about Chuva Lamed Ches through Mem Beis, in a big arichas, he collects all the data and all the Rishonim, and he proves l'daita conclusively that women who are doing a mitzvah shazman grama are not able to make a bracha. Now, a very interesting flashpoint in this machlekes is the sugya of passing from chalemus, and I'll explain how. Now, to circle back from where we started from, there's the shmuz we said from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which ostensibly is talking about a halacha shayla, where the Gemara seems to say divrei chalemus le'maylim le'meridin. When it comes to a Yerusha question, to a Chesed Mishpatik question, even if the dream and the chaleim tells you where something is, divrei chalemus le'maylim le'meridin, you could just ignore it. Now, the Yerushalmi, on that Tosefta, the Yerushalmi that the Gemara in Sanhedrin is quoting, I believe it's a Tosefta in Maestris, I think, but the Yerushalmi Afanart brings a machlekes. The Yerushalmi says Rav Yoina Savar, Rav Yoina holds that dafka, if a person is mitztar v'rabbe chaloim, then we're not chayshish l'dvarav. Meaning, if a guy was very mitztar about where this money is supposed to go, who it belongs to, and then he saw a chaloim, we disregard his words. I'm sorry, I take back. Dafka when he's not mitztar. But if a person was very mitztar, then you have to be chayshish that maybe because of his tzar, he was zeichet to have a true chaloim, and this was a real gilui to him. The Gemara brings another day. Rav Yossi says fakert. Mitzvah, don't be chayshish, because then the person just thinks about it, he dreams about whatever he's thinking about. But if he wasn't mitzvah b'chal and it wasn't on his mind, and he saw it in a chalaim, then we have to be chayshish that his words were true. Now, kumtais from this machlekes in the Yerushalmi is that it seems pretty clear that the Yerushalmi, the Amiram and the Yerushalmi are holding not like the Bavli. The Bavli is saying divrei chalemus le'maylim le'meridin, just ignore them; they're not relevant at all ever. But the Yerushalmi seems to be saying that certainly in one of the cases, meaning each man the Amar, whatever his way of learning it is, but certainly in one of the cases, the chalemus are relevant and they should be taken seriously. So here you have already, in the times of the Chazal, the man the Amrim who are talking about rechoning with divrei chalemus legabe halacha psuka. Now, in the Tkuvas HaGaonim, there's a Chuvas HaGaonim HaChadashis, I think it's Simon Kuf Tesvav, where there's a Chuvah there where Pashtus, the Shoyal is Rabbeinu Nissim Gaon, asking to Rav Hai Gaon, writing stories about the life of Rav Trunoi Gaon. Now, it's interesting, when Rav Nissim Gaon is describing Rav Trunoi Gaon to Rav Hai Gaon, he writes that V'amol, he was Saimech to do Shailas B'chalaim, the Heruloi, different things, and sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. It's the language of the Shail is a little bit arichastic, but he writes that it was far from conclusive. It wasn't, to be assumed that always you would get a response, but via Mol, there was a good response. Sometimes it was left more unclear. And to which Rav Hai Gaon responds, Rav Hai Gaon says that it exists, such a thing. Rav Hai Gaon writes, he says, Shamanu ki haya gam haya, misharaya tshuva muchachas l'masha shayil. I've heard also that there were people who got, clear answers to what they asked. Aval achshav, I've only seen like a Simana Milsa for a Talmud Chacham who's asking something. But and then he says, there are people they're very sharp and on target, and then there are those that don't get good answers. So Rav Hai Gaon does not discount. Rav Hai Gaon, and the Gaonim were much more big, like I would say rationalists. The Gaonim a lot of times discount things that are hard to prove or to explain. Rav Hai Gaon and Rav Nissim Gaon writing about Rav Trunoi Gaon are not discounting the existence of chalemus as a methodology to get information and to pass in shaylas. Rav Hai Gaon is just saying that it's far from a given that the information will be accurate. You can't not know with any certitude that it's accurate when you see it b'chaleim. Now, In the tkufa of the Gaone of the Rishonim and Befrat Chassidei Ashkenaz, there you find much more of a leaning on this concept of paskening from Chalemus. Now, I'm going to quote a lot from the Hakdama of Ruv Margolius to the Shailas Shuvas Min HaShamayim that we'll discuss shortly. But in the Hakdama there, Ruv Margolius compiles an amazing list of all the different, Rishonim and Poskim who quoted things from Chalemus. And just like the short list over here, he quotes the Ravan, for example, brings a story. Maisa, there was a story, he says, Shahoitze chasani yayin me'achavis l'kli katan sheshasim menu, goy yayin kasher ve'tiru. There was a shayla of yayin nesach, and we were mekel, he says. V'yem Shabbos, it was on Shabbos. La'achar achila, after I ate, yashanti, I went to sleep, the Ravan writes. U'boy elai mori b'chalayim, my Rebbe came to me b'chalayim. V'hira kaira hashaysim b'mizrake yayin. He would call out. He was calling out for us a pasuk that talks about the great avera of the Shoyse Yayin over here. When I woke up, I understood what they were telling me, and I understood that this was a correction to my psak, that I had made a mistake. Similarly, the Rabbi Moshe Mikutzi in the Hakdama to the Smag, the Bala Smag, he brings a dream that they showed him. He says that he's writing his sefer was al pi chaloim. I was not planning on writing the sefer ve'erev b'chaloim b'maras halayla, that I'm supposed to do this. Another famous psak is from Rebbe Ephraim of Regensburg, another one of the Balei HaTosfos. Now this is like a famous shaila because this comes up in Tosfos itself. There was a type of fish, maybe it's a turbot, it's unclear exactly what type of fish this is, but Rebbe Ephraim of Regensburg was matir the dag that they called barbuta. It says, in his dream that night, they brought him a full plate of shratzim to eat. And it says, he got angry at the person who brought him. He says, and to which the waiter in his dream who was serving him the fish told him, why are you getting angry at me? You're the one who was matir shratzim today. So, and from there he woke up in his dream and he realized that he made a mistake. And he should not have been matir the barbuta fish by yom. And what did he do? He says, Miyad Amar Mimitasev Shavar Kol Kederis V'Ka'ar Sha'achlu B'hem, and he broke all the Kederis. The Tashbitz brings a dream that he had, the Tashbitz Katan, this is referring to, brings a dream of something, a Shaila of Isser, of Trefus, where he had a Chalaim, Hera B'Chalaim, the Arzarua famously brings, not a Psak, but he brings, it is a Psak even, there's a Shaila and how to write the name Akiva. How do you spell the name Akiva? Ayin Kof Yud Veiz Aleph or Ayin Kof Yud Veiz Hey? And the Arzarua writes Heroli B'Chaloim, that's how you spell it. They brought on the pasuk Arzarua L'Tzadik U'Liyesh Relev Simcha, which is the Seifei Tevis equal Akiva Ayin Kof Yud Veiz Hey. So they explain to the Arzarua that that's the proper way. So the Arzarua brings a dream for a psak. There's many more. Some Rabbeinu Elio and Tosfos brings Neshalti B'Chaloim, and they bring a psak to him. And the list goes on and on. The Ruv Margolius in his Hakdama over here compiles like an amazing list of Rishonim. So it seems very clear that during the Tkufas of Rishonim, it became much more ragil and normal to be Saimech on Chalemis, even for Psakim. But nowhere more does this find its footing to be a normal practice than in the Sefer Shailos Teshuvas Min HaShamayim. Now, and that is, there's an entire Tshuva Sefer from Rabbeinu Yaakov Mimorvich. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. It's a town in Provençal in France, so my French accent is not up to snuff. But Rabbeinu Yaakov, the Mechaber of the Shailos Teshuvas Min HaShamayim, is put out an entire sefer of tshuvas, of shailos, that he would we don't know exactly how he would do it, but that he would prepare before he went to sleep, on some sort of petek or some sort of mahalach, where he would write a very specific question, and he would leave it behind, and in the morning, he would have an answer to these questions. Now, there's different kisvayadis of this sefer, and some have more than others, and some include different shailos that other versions don't include. But Pachas Yaiser, it's a version of around 72 tshuvas, shailos tshuvas that Rabbi Yaakov asked b'chalaim and got responses to. And this is probably the most complete, episode in someone being saimech on shailos chalaim or revealed information from psak from chalaim to paskin from it. Now, what's interesting to note is this sefer of Shailos Teshuvas Min HaShamayim is almost exclusively actual halacha shailos, meaning it's almost exclusively actual halacha shailos in all sorts of inyanei psak. Now, most of them follow a particular pattern where there'll be a groisa machlekes rishonim, a bakanta machlekes or a known machlekes of different deis, and Rabbeinu Yaakov will ask for like a hachra to know what to do. For example, one of the shilas he asks are what type of tefillin to put on, like Rashi Rabbeinu Tam. To which that one, granted, there is no conclusive response, and the response is Elu ve'elu. He asks many other questions. Now, there is one interesting question over here that he never received a response to, that some, Talmidei Chachamim and scholars believe is not really part of this collection, doesn't belong here, is in Tshuva Ayin Beis, he asks, Al Keitz HaGeula, Sha'al K'mayken, I asked, when is Mashiach coming? Achlei Matzah Tshuva Ksuva Lefanav. I wasn't able to find the letter, the answer written in front of me. Now we know from a Sugi in Sanhedrin and the Tzadik Zayin and elsewhere that when Mashiach is coming is one of the biggest secrets that a person could never know. And although many different Gedolim over the Deiris, and we've spoken about this in the past, took a crack at estimating, according to different calculations based on Psukim and Daniel and other Sugis, the Rambam has a Messiah, the Ramban had a Messiah, the others, the Ralbag, the Barbanel, endless different messiahs as to when Mashiach is coming. But Lamaisa, we know that is an answer that was never provided in a conclusive way, and it's right on brand that in Shutman HaShamayim as well, he receives no answer to this question. Now, so why is this relevant to our discussion? So first of all, this is the penultimate example of someone relying on Shaylas Halacha Lamaisa. Now the question is, how did later Paiskim and decisors of the law look at this Shalos Shuvas Min Hashemayim? Did they assume this to be psak? Did they take this in? Did they not take this in? How do we deal with this? Now, so there's some examples that make it to halacha, some examples that don't make it to halacha. But why the main, not the main, but one of the most interesting shalos that's discussed here that touched off a firestorm, and this is why I mentioned the Rebbe strong position in the beginning of this year, is this shaila. Shaila Aleph in the Shalos Shuvas Min Hashemayim reads as follows. It says, Sha'alti al hanashim shemavarches al lulav, women that make a bracha on lulav, v'al mi shemavarech lahen al tkiyas shayfer, im yesh aveir b'davar. Is there an aveir b'davar? V'im have a bracha levatala achar she'ein mitzuvis v'im lav. Is this considered a bracha levatala because they're not mitzuvis? Tahainu. This is the question being presented: is do we paskin like the Rambam or do we paskin like Rabbeinu Tam? When it comes to mitzvahs asay shazman grama, and you're not really mechuyev to make a mitzvah, but a woman wants to make a mitzvah, how do we paskin? We paskin she's allowed or she's not allowed. Now here there is an answer. The Hishivu says they got an answer. It said as follows: V'chi achshar dari kol hashatayim le'elech asar shma b'koila v'lechem mar lehem shuv lechem la'elechem u'birchu es Hashem alekeichem. Go tell the women to make a bracha. The ha'ad Megillah v'Chanukah u'pir shalim amatzino. No, fine. But the first line of the tshuva is he said that it's achshar dari and lech taimer. Go tell the women shuv lechem la'elechem u'birchu es Hashem alekeichem. Make a bracha. Now here, you so to speak have a hechra in this shaila, in this grace of machlekes Rabbeinu Tam and the Rambam that even makes it unresolved to Shulchan Aruch. You have a hechra over here from the Shut Min Hashemayim that tells you very clearly that women should make a bracha. Now, so let's understand how this applies to us. Now, just the fact that the machlekes persists into Shulchan Aruch, meaning that the Ramah and the Mechaber continue to dispute the same point, tells us already that whatever the Shut Min Hashemayim said or published was never considered conclusive. Like, it wasn't treated as mamish, like a Nevuah Min Hashemayim that puts everything to rest, puts the whole sugya to bed. Because if that would be so, there'd be no machlekes Ramah and the Mechaber anymore, right? Meaning that machlekes would have fallen away because this is considered a Nevuah. So clearly Zetman from this, from the fact that this still makes it into Shulchan Aruch, and truth be told, there are many other examples from the Shut Min Hashemayim of Shailas that are unresolved even after he weighs in on them. So that tells us that the Paiskim who came after him did not look at what he was saying as like a conclusive nevuah that shut down all conversation. At best, it could be used as a smach, but not as something that ended the conversation. Now, in regards to this actual shaila, so the Chida in Shema Gedalim and Rechuvin Yosef Aimitz writes that he's aware of a minig for Nashim Sfardiyos to make a bracha on Mitzvah Sasei Man Grama, and L'chairi says you could base the reason for that minig on the Shut Min Hashemayim. He says even though the Mechaber and Shulchan Aruch paskins that they're not mechuyev to, but Zetman from this dream that Rabbeinu Yaakov had, that it's considered good and suitable, so maybe that's why the minig, he says that's why it's acceptable for there to be a minig, even though it's keneged the Mechaber and the Chidah holds that we paskin like the Mechaber, still there could be makom for a minig for Sephardic women to make a bracha on the Mitzvah Seishes Man Grama, and this is what Rav Mordechai Eliyahu brings in his tshuva and says that therefore women, Bisman Hazeh, or Eretz Yisrael or elsewhere, who want to be noyig to make a bracha, mitzvah seishas man grama, they're allowed to. There's nothing wrong with it. Now, Rabbi Vadia, and it's obviously beyond the discussion for today to be able to go into everything that he does over there. Rabbi Vadia collects every bit of information that's relevant to the sugya, strings it all together, and proves conclusively, with a very strong emphasis, that the shut min hashemayim is not to be relied on. Meaning, this chalemus from Rabbi Yaakov are such a pivotal piece in his whole full breakdown of why not to be seimach on chalemus. And he goes through it, and it's a long tshuva. He brings all the relevant information. He strongly argues on the chidah, and this is one of the strongest tshuvas that provide in writing the underpinning of Rabbi Vadia's committed shita, that for a Sfardi you have to paskin like the Beis Yosef no matter what. Come, no matter what. A Sfardi kiblu alatzmum to paskin like the Beis Yosef, and that is the halacha psuka, and there's no wiggle room. Now, many other Sfardi shpaiskim, were chelik on him in certain ways, in certain cases, certain examples. But Rabbi Vadia very strongly held that this is the halacha, and this is the kernel in the beginning of a journey. But later, with Rabbi Vadia's own literary output and his children's literary output, and his term as chief rabbi, and now both of his children's terms as chief rabbi, this became a very institutionalized psak, in his whole Weltan Shangan worldview that was memorialized in hundreds of occurrences in the Svarim that the Yosef family produced, Rabbi Vadia's voluminous amount of contribution, followed by his kids. So this to me is just it's an interesting vignette to look at Rabbi Vadia, like the kernel, the underpinning of Rabbi Vadia's very, very strong position on this matter. But in a very practical context, and in related mamish to the most primary source of Shut Min HaShemayim. Now, there is one thing that we'd be, if someone wants to see this whole thing, they can look up this tshuva. It's in Yabiya Imer and Archaim Chelik Aleph. I believe it starts from give or take tshuva Lamed Ches, and it continues for a few tshuvas. It's a great read, it's easy reading, but it's very thorough. Now, there is one very important kudah, and this the Chida addresses, is that we know that Chazal in many places throughout Shas say a very pashut klal, a rule that we know, and that is Torah Lab B'Shemayim. The Torah is not gepaskin by what happens in Shemayim. The Torah was given to humans to use the Seichel Anushis, and to paskin with it. Now, it would be miyusser to go through all the Gemaras that say this, but I'll just mention, obviously, the famous Gemara with Tanosh Lachnoi, with Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Eliezer, where it became very clear that the psak is not like what the Simman and Shemayim are. Additionally, there's a Gemara in Tmura that discusses when Moshe Rabbeinu was dying. So it says Moshe Rabbeinu was Hashakadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu that he's going to die. So he goes to Yeshua and he says, Yeshua, I'm on the way out. Is there anything that you need clarification to? And Yeshua tells Moshe Rabbeinu, did I ever leave you for a minute, for a moment? It says, V'ana Yeshua lemash mitach ha'il. I was the biggest Talmud, the biggest masman. I stayed with you every second. Of course, I know everything. I know it all already. To which Miyad, the Tash Kaich and Moshe Rabbeinu felt bad from this thing that Yeshua told him that he doesn't need him. And Nishtakach, Yeshua forgot 3,000 halachas, the Gemara tells us, Me'evli Shel Moshe. Now the Gemara in Tmur tells us there might have been more halachas that were forgotten. So it says Klal Yisrael became furious at Yeshua, that, how could you, forsake us and neglect the Torah, so to speak, by forgetting all these halachas that are so integral to the Messiah of Klal Yisrael. So to which, so it says, Yeshua says, what should I do? To know them b'nevuah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, Kenstanish, Torah Lav Hashemayim. You have no eight to lech tarad b'muchama. Go get them busy with something else so that they shouldn't be concerned with this. And ultimately, the Gemara tells us that a Snil ben Kenaz was machzirim b'popule. A Snil ben Kenaz was able to relearn these dinim b'popule. The Gemara in Megillah tells us it's bidash napasik in Navi Rashai l'chadish b'davar. Navi's not able to mechadish anything in the Torah. So we know there's a rule, there's an algemein rule from many, many places in Chazal that Torah Lab B'Shemayim, psak does not go by what happens in Shemayim. So I would say it's like a basic question. How could any of these chalemis that talk about psakim, all these cases of the Rishonim, even the Yerushalmi and etc., be relevant to halacha of Torah Lab B'Shemayim? Now, there's different roots that are given, but and I'm not. It's really a topic farzich to go in and explain it. But the Chida, when he discusses the Shut Min HaShemayim, the Chida gives this type of klal. I think this is like an underpinning in a lot of the rationale. The Chida seems to say that anything that's an old machlokes and all the tzadim lahakal lahater, all the yediyas hatayra and haravanya was already put on the plate. And now there's a question, you just need like a beer or milsa, you just need like a little extra boost or a point in a direction just to bring it to the culmination. That's not what it means by Torah Lavashmayim. The Chidah says Torah Lavashmayim, he means to just go from scratch and disregard the human input and the human amelis that's necessary, and to go be Seimach on a Nevuah or something like that. That's Torah Bashmayim, and that we're not Seimach on. But if a person did all the work and figured out all that stuff and now just needs a little bit of clarity in one direction or another, that, he says, is considered just like helping the human, take it to the full shleimus, and that is, allowed and acceptable into the kopus of halacha. Now, there's a lot of ways to say this idea and to really verfleischig this vart, that sometimes the chalaim is really just the human's own thoughts and works and the machshavas coming to fruition, and it's not considered bashamayimi. And there's more ways to say this, but I just wanted to, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. I want to mention it, but it's maybe one day we'll circle back fully to the topic of Torah B'Shmayim B'Shleimus and go through all these Gemaras and all these Chazals and all the exceptions and the different examples and how to figure it out. But for now, we'll leave it on this note.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.